Have you ever wondered what happens when a billionaire gets caught with 190 million euros in stolen assets abroad? Most people assume the money goes back to the country it was stolen from. But what if it did not? What if instead that money was used to pay off the very person it was seized from? In December 2019, the UK National Crime Agency froze 140 million euros in bank accounts belonging to Malik Riaz, one of Pakistan's most powerful real estate tycoons. They used civil freezing orders, a tool that requires no criminal conviction, only suspicion. The NCA called it a victory. The press celebrated. The world moved on. But something strange happened next. That same money, the money seized as proceeds of crime, was transferred back to Pakistan. Not to the national treasury, not to victims. It went directly into a Supreme Court account designated for Malik Riaz's own legal fines. Imagine being 62-year-old Mohammad Aslam. You invested your entire life, savings, 80,000 euros, into a Bahria town property. You trusted the developer. You trusted the system. Then one day, your investment disappears. Not because the market crashed, not because of fraud, because the government used seized corruption money to pay off the very man who took your savings. He was not alone. 47,000 other investors watched their life savings vanish the same way. The Supreme Court of Pakistan had called the entire scheme colossal personal enrichment. They documented it. They condemned it. Yet somehow, the system protected it. And at the center of it all was a sealed envelope. A document so confidential that cabinet members were not even allowed to read it. A prime minister's signature on something he may never have fully understood. The question is not whether this happened. The question is, why? To understand how this trick was pulled off, you first have to understand the liability. We need to go back 9 months before the settlement, to March 2019. The location is the Supreme Court of Pakistan. Malik Riaz, the country's most powerful real estate developer, is standing on the edge of a cliff. His company, Bahria Town, has been caught in a massive scandal. The project in Karachi, Bahria Town, Karachi, was built on illegal grounds. We are talking about the acquisition of over 30,000 acres of government land. Land that was meant for low-cost housing for the poor, diverted instead to build luxury villas for the rich. The Supreme Court was ruthless in its judgment. They described the operation as nefarious activities at a huge, massive, and colossal level. They stripped away the veneer of legitimate business and called it what it was, personal enrichment at the cost of the state. But in Pakistan, everything is negotiable. The court offered Riaz a way out. He would not go to jail, provided he paid a fine. A staggering fine. 460 billion rupees. At the time, that was roughly $3 billion US. It was the largest settlement offer ever accepted in the history of the country's judiciary. Riaz accepted, but the terms were strict. This was not a promise to pay someday. It was a rigid 7-year installment plan. The payments had to be deposited directly into a designated account controlled by the Supreme Court Registrar. If Bahria Town missed 3 consecutive installments, the deal would be void. The National Accountability Bureau, NAB, would immediately reopen criminal cases. The state would seize the entire project. The empire he spent decades building would be dismantled overnight. So you have a billionaire facing a liquidity crisis. He is asset-rich, owning thousands of acres and undeveloped plots, but he is cash poor. He needs liquid capital, billions of rupees every month, to keep the Supreme Court at bay. This creates a desperate situation. It is compounded by a problem thousands of miles away. Riaz has access to vast sums of money, but a significant chunk of his liquid cash, hundreds of millions of pounds, is sitting in bank accounts in the United Kingdom. Under normal circumstances, he would just wire this money to Pakistan to pay his fine. But he cannot. Why? Because the British authorities have gotten there first. The National Crime Agency has frozen his accounts under suspicion of money laundering. He is trapped. He needs the money to pay the court in Pakistan, but the court in London will not let him touch it. This is the perfect squeeze. A liquidity crisis at home and an asset freeze abroad. Most people would fold. But Malik Riaz saw a way to make the two problems cancel each other out. The instrument of this squeeze was a law passed just 2 years earlier, the Criminal Finances Act of 2017. That law gave British authorities a new, highly effective weapon called the Account Freezing Order, or AFO. You have to understand the mechanics of an AFO to see why it is so dangerous for international tycoons. In a traditional criminal case, the state must prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. That is a high bar. It requires hard evidence, witnesses, and a direct link to a specific crime. But an AFO operates on a civil standard of proof. They only need to show that on the balance of probabilities, the money is likely illicit. They do not need a conviction. They do not need a confession. They just need to show that the math does not add up. The National Crime Agency began tightening the screws in December 2018. They secured the first freezing orders against accounts linked to the Riaz family, locking down £20 million. It was a warning shot, but Riaz did not, or could not, explain the source of the funds to the agency's satisfaction. So the investigation escalated. 8 months later, in August 2019, the NCA returned to the Westminster Magistrates Court. This time, they were not looking for pocket change. They secured 8 additional orders. In a single stroke, another £120 million was frozen. Now the total sat at roughly £140 million in cash. But the NCA was not just looking at bank ledgers, they were looking at real estate, specifically a property at 1 Hyde Park Place. This address is significant. It is a trophy asset in one of London's most exclusive districts, but its history is even more telling. The mansion had previously been owned by Hassan Nawaz, the son of former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. In 2016, just before the Panama Papers scandal broke, the property was sold to Malik Riaz's son for £42.5 million. By the time the NCA was done with their valuation for the settlement, they pegged it at £50 million. So here is the full picture of the squeeze. By late 2019, Malik Riaz had nearly £200 million of his wealth trapped in the UK legal system. He was now facing a brutal calculation. He could fight the National Crime Agency in court. He certainly had the resources to hire the best lawyers in London. But fighting an account freezing order is a messy public process. It would mean years of litigation. It would mean opening his books to forensic accountants who would comb through decades of transactions, shell companies, and offshore transfers. For a man whose business empire relies on opacity, that kind of exposure is a death sentence. And even if he fought and won, it would take too long. The litigation could drag on for 3, 4, maybe 5 years. But the Supreme Court in Pakistan was not waiting 5 years. They were waiting for their next monthly installment. If he defaulted in Pakistan while fighting in London, he would lose everything. He was stuck. He could not access his money to pay his fine, and he could not explain his money to free it up. He needed a way to turn this frozen asset into a liquid payment. He needed the British government to stop acting like a prosecutor and start acting like a banker. And that is exactly what happened next. This is where the story shifts from a legal battle to a political conspiracy. The solution to Malik Riaz's dilemma appeared in the form of a settlement negotiation that took place in the shadows in November and December 2019. The key figure here is Shahzad Akbar. At the time, he was the special assistant to the Prime Minister on accountability. His job description was literally to recover looted wealth from abroad. He became the bridge between the tycoon and the British authorities. The narrative sold to the NCA was pragmatic. If you fight Riaz, he will drain your budget with years of litigation. Settle now, take the money, and call it a victory. On December 3rd, 2019, the deal was struck. The National Crime Agency, the letters NCA, announced they had accepted a civil settlement of £190 million. But there was a critical clause inserted into the agreement, a clause that Malik Riaz had likely fought tooth and nail to secure. The NCA explicitly stated the settlement did not represent a finding of guilt. This single sentence was the key to the lock. It allowed Riaz to spin the narrative instantly. Before the ink was dry, he tweeted that he had sold his United Kingdom property to pay the Supreme Court of Pakistan. He framed a forced seizure of illicit assets as a voluntary act of compliance. He was not a money launderer getting caught. He was a patriot bringing money home. But for this spin to work, the money had to move in a very specific way. And this required the complicity of the highest levels of the Pakistani state. On the same day the settlement was announced in London, a cabinet meeting was held in Islamabad. It was a closed-door session. Shahzad Akbar walked in with a summary regarding the repatriation of the funds. But he did not hand out copies. He presented it as a non-agenda item. The document was kept in a sealed envelope. When ministers asked to read what they were approving, they were told they could not. They were told that the confidentiality of the agreement with the United Kingdom government was a matter of national security. They were told that if the envelope was opened, the deal would collapse and Pakistan would lose the money. So the cabinet approved it. They signed off on a deal they had never read. This approval authorized the switch. When £140 million was transferred from the National Crime Agency, NCA, it did not go to the Ministry of Finance. It did not go to the Federal Consolidated Fund for use by the public. Instead, it was routed to the National Bank of Pakistan and then deposited directly into the Supreme Court Registrar's account, the specific account designated for Bahria Town's fines. The government of Pakistan effectively intercepted the state's own recovered money and handed it over to the court on behalf of Malik Riaz. He received a credit of £190 million against his 460 billion rupee fine. The money that was seized from him as dirty money was used to clean his record. It was a perfect circle. The state recovered nothing. Riaz lost nothing he wasn't already obligated to pay. But in the world of high-stakes corruption, favors of this magnitude are rarely free. There is always a transaction cost, and this is where the Al-Qadir Trust enters the equation. Just 3 weeks after the settlement, on December 26, 2019, a new trust was registered. The trustees included Prime Minister Imran Khan and his wife Bushra Bibi. The purpose of the trust was ostensibly to build a spiritual university, but a university needs land. Baria Town, the entity that had just been saved from default by the government's intervention, stepped up. They gifted 458 canals of prime land in Jhelum to the Al-Qadir Trust. They did not just donate the land, they handled the infrastructure, the roads, and the construction. The prosecution's argument is simple. This was the quid pro quo. The government facilitated a bailout worth £190 million for Riaz, and in return, Riaz provided a massive endowment to a trust controlled by the Prime Minister's family. The timeline is the smoking gun. The settlement, the sealed envelope, the transfer, and the trust registration all clustered within a single month. It was a synchronized operation. The system worked perfectly for the architects, but only for a moment. The aftermath of this deal would eventually tear the country's political landscape apart. The first crack appeared in the UK, while the National Crime Agency had agreed to a no-guilt settlement. The British Home Office was less forgiving. In November 2021, the UK Court of Appeal upheld a decision to cancel Malik Riaz's visa. The court cited his involvement in corruption and financial misconduct. It was a supreme irony. The British government was happy to take his money, but they refused to take him. But the real explosion happened in Pakistan. When the government of Imran Khan fell in 2022, the protection around the Al-Qadir deal evaporated. The sealed envelope was ripped open by investigators. In May 2023, Imran Khan was arrested in connection with this case. The image of a former prime minister being dragged away by paramilitaries sparked nationwide riots that left military installations burning. The country plunged into chaos, all tracing back to that transaction in December 2019. The legal reckoning arrived in January 2025. An accountability court sentenced Imran Khan to 14 years in prison and his wife to 7 years. The court found that the land donation was indeed a kickback for facilitating the diversion of £190 million. As for Malik Riaz, he returned to his familiar strategy, disappearance. He was declared a proclaimed offender and fled to Dubai. His assets in Pakistan were frozen, but the man himself remained out of reach, watching from a safe distance as the politicians who signed his deal went to prison. Finally, in March 2025, more than 5 years after the money was seized, the Supreme Court ordered the £190 million to be transferred to the federal government. The funds were allocated for the new Danish University in Islamabad. It took a government collapse, a prime minister in jail, and a constitutional crisis for the public to see a single penny of the money that was promised to them in that triumphant press release back in 2019. The money eventually reached the people, but only after it had destroyed almost everyone who touched it. Look at the final equation. The UK seized the proceeds of corruption. Pakistan routed it back. The criminal's own fine was paid. A prime minister went to jail. The tycoon walked free. And you, the public, waited 5 years to see a single university built. This was not a failure of the system. It was the system working exactly as designed. It is a machine built to protect capital and obscure transactions behind the veil, of national security. Transparency wasn't just ignored, it was weaponized against the people through confidentiality deeds and sealed envelopes. The most disturbing part is not this specific £190 million. It is the lingering question: how many other seized assets have been quietly diverted through similar mechanisms that we never heard about? If you want to understand how these shadow systems operate, when the law becomes nothing more than a transaction fee, make sure you subscribe.